welcome to the debut, the premiere, the first episode of Table Talk. I appreciate you watching or viewing. You could have done anything with your time, but yet you're here with us. So I'm happy about that. And I'm very excited to welcome the very first guest of Table Talk, Matt Watson, Councilman Matt Watson, who is actually running for mayor. A little bit about Matt Watson that I've read up so far. This is our first time actually personally meeting, but he's been in the community for a long time. He's a public servant now, but he also goes outside of the boundaries of his district, as I read. Yeah. Which is something that I'm definitely going to tackle into because I was intrigued by that. A lot of times you hear about politicians and they only serve their constituents. Mr. Watson here seems to serve the city as a whole, which was intriguing to me. So we want to tackle into that, but again, this is your first time viewing and or listening. So I feel obligated to make sure that we let you know what Table Talk is about. Table Talk is a podcast that promotes healthy dialogue with everyone from different walks of life. So we want to make sure that we have proper ideas to help society in general move along. Too many times it's people talking at each other and they're not having conversation. They're not talking with one another. And that's what we want to promote here. So I got all that out the way. Let's welcome Councilman Matt Watson. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be your very first guest.
Yes, man.
I've never been the first guest on anything. So
I wanted to come out swinging, so I said, let me get a sitting councilman. Let me get a candidate for mayor, and there's so many people in the race now. Mm-hmm. That's amazing as well too, as far as just all the different candidates. I mean, it's what is it like 6, 7 now?
6.
Okay, it was 7. Mm-hmm. But it's 6 now. But yeah, so I said, hey, let's have a conversation.
Gotcha.
So
I'm ready.
I want to dig right in. Big elephant in the room. You're running for mayor. Mm-hmm. What sparked that? Because you're on the council now. And how long have you been a councilman?
I've been as an elected council member. This is my 4th year doing this. I worked for the previous council person before who wasn't as engaged in the community, like going out to visit with the community, HOA meetings, things of that nature, which a lot of council people, they get invited to come speak to a neighborhood or another neighborhood or a community group that may transcend multiple neighborhoods because of they share a business interest or other things like that, and a lot of zoning issues that can make some people pretty upset if something's coming to their neighborhood instead of what used to be there. So there's a lot of meetings of that nature that I was afforded the great opportunity to go and listen to folks, do a whole lot of, trying to make people come together. Take people in another room and say, I know y'all hate each other, but I'll tell you what, I think I got a solution. I promise y'all I'm not going to tell anyone you smiled or you shook hands, but when we come out, there's going to be a solution. And both y'all can seem like you're a little unhappy with, but in the long run, everybody's going to be happy.
So you've been having table talk this whole time, right?
Well, not necessarily like this, but very much like that, of course. Because you can't get things done unless you have a conversation. You just can't.
I agree with that. And you serve District 11, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, where exactly is that for people who may not know?
Okay.
As far as
where Jefferson Highway hits Government Street, and then you basically follow that. You take Government Street over to South Carrollton up to Florida to Airline Highway, and Jefferson Highway. I guess you take College, Jefferson to College and come down. It's basically between Airline Highway and I-10, coming from that area by Jefferson Government Street, going all the way down to where PQ goes from Airline to I-10. And there's a little bit south of 10 where you take Essen or Seguin to Perkins, and then north of Airline Highway you go Old Hammond out to Sherwood and take Sherwood down to Coursey and come back.
Okay. Now, roughly how many constituents do you say that you have in your area?
Well, we have 12 council districts total, so we want to have everyone get equal representation. So the biggest difference between council districts is usually land mass based on density of population, because each area has about 40,000 people.
Okay.
Because we're trying to break up the population. That's why when you get a census, you'll get a redistricting because of changes in density and where people have moved to make sure that they stay. Each council person represents about the equal number of people. So they're all about between 39 and 41,000 people in each council district.
Okay. Now, you decided to throw your hat in the ring and run for mayor. Why?
Well, the main problem is I can pinpoint exactly something that really motivated me was when you're in the Metro Council, you're in the legislative branch. You got you know this as well as anybody. The executive branch would be the mayor and everybody underneath the mayor. You got the judicial branch, that's going to be city court and all the courts, and then you have the legislative branch, which is the council where we handle budget and we handle changing of ordinances or laws or writing ordinances or laws. And I worked very hard on something that's near and dear to my heart is reducing child sex trafficking and drug trafficking through our hotels and motels. I spoke with the district attorney's office when I first got into office, and then I had to take their rough idea, which they took from Jefferson Parish, which they implemented something similar, but it wasn't perfect in Jefferson Parish. And they said, Councilman, we need to have something like this here, this ordinance here to try to stop this, because I don't know if you know this, but from like Lake Charles to New Orleans, down in the I-10 corridor, that's the worst human trafficking and child sex trafficking section in the entire United States.
I don't think people understand the gravity of that problem. You know, especially being in Baton Rouge. You know, we are the capital of the state, but
Correct.
I don't think we really kind of think about things of that nature.
And the reason why I think people don't think about it too much is because it happens in hotels and motels right along. The reason I have the biggest problem in District 11, if you looked at it on a map and you'd see, if you look down, you'd say, oh, there's a bunch of trees and you got the mall and you got the new children's hospital and all this other kind of stuff. But we all have these hotels, motels and hotels along these routes where anybody traveling from state to state or within the state would pull off and go grab a night's sleep and keep moving. But it's also where drug trafficking happens, prostitution happens, and child sex trafficking happens, because they can pop off, set up shop in a hotel, and then if the heat comes on, they just hop on a highway and keep going. So they're not getting too far off of the main route, because a lot of this stuff is a transient business. We had an unfortunate lady who was kidnapped in Memphis, Tennessee, and back when Backpage was up on Craigslist, they were using that to promote this kidnapped girl, actually, she was 16, and we're traveling around, and they actually caught the folks that were hustling her on Boardwalk off of Sherwood Forest near I-12 here in town, because they got a tip from the hotel that this didn't look right. This girl looked beat up. She looked like she wasn't happy. She was crying all the time, and she was with two dudes that didn't seem, nobody was trying to comfort her the whole time, so they turned it in, and so they watched them, and one of the guys ran a stop sign, so they pulled him over, and apparently when he stopped, an actual illegal pistol slid out from underneath the passenger seat, and that was enough to make the guy get out of the car. They ran everything and found out that this was the connect, and they had been taking her all over the country. And it was in a hotel right by the Chuck E. Cheese over there. And to save this woman, it's a huge deal. But you'd ask me why I wanted to throw my hat in to run for mayor, and it's because as a member of the legislative branch, I worked with the Hospitality Association, went right to the people who have association that manage hotel owners and hotel managers, because I'll tell you one thing anybody in the legislative branch here knows is sure doesn't include running a hotel. Right. So you want to go to those folks and find out, here are the rules they're trying to implement. Do these make sense as far as does it match up with how a hotel is operated, especially in the day and age of people getting hotel rooms online and all this other kind of stuff. And you got these point systems, and so people don't necessarily have to come in and sign up and all this kind of stuff, because it's all kept in a database. So
no face, no case. Exactly.
So you got to figure out how this will work. And so it took about a year of working with the Hospitality Association to make sure that they were comfortable with it. In a lot of ways, the hotels were being, in certain instances, much more harsh, still within the legal realm of how they were treating their customers, but they were much more harsh to try to stop things like this and partying, and where kids would come in and rent a hotel room and trash the place, even though they lived a block away, and they were just, their parents were home, so they rented a hotel room or something like that. So they had some things in place to try to stop illegal activity. So they informed ways that we could make this better. They in not just making it more strict and being able to find illegal activity better, but also in a lot of ways how to make it work within the system of a modern day way that you get a hotel room.
Right.
So when we came up with this system, we came up with the hotel motel ordinance. I mean, it's the first time ever, and I grabbed Erica Green. You know, she's an attorney. I didn't know if she ever wanted to be judge or something like that, but I knew that she had an interest in helping with something like this. So I had her come aboard, and she had meetings with the hotel motel associations as well. Mm-hmm. And so you got a Democrat, a Republican, you got a white person, you got an African American person. It seemed like everybody was united, because who in the heck is going to stand up and say, "Oh, wait a minute, we need to leave child sex trafficking alone"? Who's going to stand up for that? You know,
like who's going to say, "Hey, this is an industry we have to really kind of protect"? Child sex trafficking.
Nobody is. And so when we came and had it come before council, once we got all of our ducks in a row and had what we thought was a perfect ordinance, which I think is very well done. Mm-hmm. The hospitality industry had their president come in and stand at the microphone and say, "We need these regulations." And I don't know of any industry ever in the history of any regulation that came up and said, "We need to be regulated."
Most industries, most businesses, they shy away from regulations.
Correct. Correct.
And I know that's a big talking point for, I mean, if you watch news and anytime, a politician is running, like, less regulation and, less tax.
There's government overreach,
exactly.
Stay out of my business and all this other kind of stuff.
But just saying the president actually came in and
because
please regulate
we must have had 8 different meetings. I mean, we're not talking about meetings with 6 people. We had meetings where it was like the quarterly meeting of the entire organization.
Right.
In some big restaurant back when we could get together before COVID, it would be like 100 people in a room.
It was so long ago.
I know. Like 100 people in a room each time talking about this and asking pertinent questions. And at first, a lot of hesitation, a lot of pushback until they realized, I'm not here to stick this down, anybody's business. I'm asking you, how can we make this better? And we got to the point where it's before council. They come up and say, we need these regulations. We got folks that were advocates for the victims of human trafficking, child sex trafficking. And there are a lot of organizations here in town. Empower 225 is a great one. And they got a lot of support from those folks. It passed unanimously, and I've never seen a standing ovation for something that passed before council. Wow. So that happens. Then 16 months it took for the executive branch to even make the application for the permit, which was the way to register your hotel to get this process started. 16 months.
So what took so long?
You're gonna have to ask the mayor.
Okay.
Because it's underneath the mayor's office.
What do you think took so long? Just I'm on the outside looking in.
I would say this. There's a lot of stuff going on, and maybe it just fell through the cracks. But I'll tell you what. Think about that girl from Memphis that was kidnapped.
Yeah.
And if she had lived that life for 16 months, think of the abuse that she would have gotten in 16 months when we could have stopped it like that before that 16-month period happened.
And multiply that times however many other...
Every other person that was falling into the life, as they call it.
Yeah.
And you get to a point where all they had to do was make an application. And nobody can tell me that it was too complicated, because we figured all that out before we even brought it to council, so there wouldn't be any excuse to hold it up. The application was, what's the name of your hotel, what's the address of your hotel, who owns it, who manages it, and who handles your insurance, and how many rooms do you have.
So it was a pretty simple application. Absolutely.
And each hotel would pay a one-time $100 fee to get the permit, and that permit allowed them to operate the hotel.
$100 is a small drop in the ocean for a hotel, right?
For a one-time payment, absolutely.
Yeah.
A one-time payment. It wasn't like they had to renew it every year. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want it to have to be renewed every year, because the people who handle permits and inspections, they got to do every elevator inspection and all this other kind of stuff all across everything.
Which can become very taxing.
Very cumbersome for them to handle. So I've been talking to Kerry Chauvin, who's over the Department of Development, which does permits and inspections. And he's like, Matt, can we do this like on a one-year basis? And I said, well, if they change ownership, change of doing business as, or somebody buys a hotel, then they have to reapply, because it'd be a different entity getting the permit. But otherwise, it stays in place unless they break the rules. And I'll be real quick with the rules. The rules are, if in a 90-day period of time there are 3 or more calls for service for human trafficking, prostitution, or drug distribution in the hotel, and that call was generated from someone who did not work at the hotel, then they get their permit revoked to operate a hotel.
Like a flag system almost.
Exactly.
Like, if you've been flagged.
But if in the spirit of community policing, this is where the community, meaning the people who run the hotel, can train their folks there to understand what to look for. Or if someone calls, if you're in room 101 and you hear something next door that sounds like someone getting beat up, or you're seeing multiple guys go in and out of a room overnight after night after night with somebody that looks really unhappy to be there, and somebody calls the front desk, and the front desk calls law enforcement, that doesn't count against them. It's if they're ignored by the front desk, and then the person gets so worried, they call law enforcement, and then there's a call for service that results in an arrest. 3 of those in 90 days, and then you get the permit revoked. And then it would take, the quickest you'd get your permit back would be 60 days.
Yeah.
That is a much bigger pinch by a long shot than the $100 to get the permit, to shut a hotel down for 60 days.
And the only reason I'm thinking that they would even ignore the call is, they're in on it or something, which, they need to be looked at that point.
Well,
right?
I'll tell you what, I learned a whole lot of things that I can't not know anymore. I mean, I've been made aware of these things, and I can't not know them anymore. As much as ignorance is bliss, I guess, in a situation. But
and it's no longer blissful for you.
There were some hotels where the owner of the hotel was in another state, and the night manager was well aware of what was going on and was on the take in some of these places. I'm not saying every one of them.
Yeah.
But I'm saying there were some that were, and it took law enforcement involvement at the location and communication to the owner to say, hey man, this is just party central, and it's not just having a couple of drinks and having a good time. It's like way off the chain how bad it was for the people. And every single room was having some kind of illegal activity going on, and there were people getting murdered at the location, all this stuff, because you had a different business in each one, and sometimes they were getting hot with one another and having arguments about this, that, and the other thing, and it was just a bad situation, and it was terrible for the people who were victimized. It was terrible for the idea that this is now, from the owner's perspective, this is not a safe hotel to go to, but this hotel was in a neighborhood, had residences nearby.
Exactly.
So you had people in the neighborhood, and that's why they got so many calls, is because when you hear gunfire next door and you live 4 or 5 houses down, you're going to make that phone call. You're not going to call the front desk at that hotel.
Yeah, no, you're going to call.
You're going to call the police. So, I mean, this is something where Jim Steele, who is investigator for the district attorney's office, when it originally passed, who was so excited. I mean, we got a bunch of pictures together, and everybody was so happy when it passed that we were going to get an award as a municipality. The law enforcement was going to get an award through the DA's office, as far as being able to stop all this. And then we go 16 months without this happening. And then so many other things that are not as life and death as something like this, because this is really, I mean, life or death, or in some ways, I hate to even say, but almost worse than death for some of these people, because some of these people get stuck in this life. They look to die as a way to get out of it because they don't have any way to get out. When they're tattooed and marked by the guy that owns them on their leg or inside their lip or something like that, where there's a tattoo of the dude that owns them, they want to get out and they'll do anything.
Exactly.
So to have something that horrible and have no action taken, because I don't think anyone in the administration is on the take on something like this, but I do think it's absolute mismanagement and shameful mismanagement of something like this, when you've got the most vulnerable are being victimized in such a horrible way. And then you've got stuff that, I mean, you look at drainage, you look at all the condemnations that need to come down, and how there's lack of action on so many different levels when it comes to just the basic services, public safety. That's part of the whole social contract. I'm going to live by your rules. I'm going to pay taxes, and I'm supposed to get, my toilet's got to flush. My car's not going to be damaged by the road. And I'm going to be protected.
Yeah, and that's the exchange with society. So
correct.
So that was the thing that pushed you to the edge, as far as saying,
exactly,
I got to run for mayor.
Exactly.
Okay, well that's actually a very interesting reason to run for mayor, and it's also very selfless. Now, with the run for mayor campaigning, I've talked to a few politicians here and there. That's always either there's no in between. They either enjoy the experience or they hate the whole jumping through hoops thing that they feel like they have to do. How has it been for you?
Well, for starters, the elephant in the room, COVID has changed the way any campaign is run. Historically, we've never had anyone run a campaign throughout something where you've had limitations on how many people can be in a space, being wearing a mask, and being socially distant like we are right now. So that's changed the way campaigns run, but it's affecting everyone equally because everyone has to go through that same thing. I love campaigning because that's a time when I get to go out and meet so many different people
It's kind
and talk
of a relief now. We've been kind of stuck and ostracized from everybody.
I love going out. I love meeting with people. And if you've ever, folks that out there that have been to I hate to call them even meet and greets because they're not. They're question and answer sessions because I like to go out and, any politician can come write a speech. But there's an excellent chance that politician can pontificate for 15 minutes about something that only one person in the room really wanted to talk about, but everybody else had some other things they needed to have answered.
Right.
I will make some generalized remarks, who I am, where I'm from, my experience, some things I'm very proud of that I've done, and what I would like to see going forward. But let's open this up for questions so I can have an actual exchange with folks because we got a lot of great people here. Yeah. And there's a lot of people that know they deserve better than what they're getting right now, and they want to know why. And they want to know how, like the 311 system. I work with in 705 Community Action Team. We meet at Estruma High School.
Right.
And that group of folks, originally, I met them because someone who lived in my district bought a 65-unit cinder block apartment complex on Eden Street.
Okay.
And he was having tires dumped around his space, so I got that cleaned up for him. And then he was working with the folks that live in the neighborhood about putting captains together for Neighborhood Watch because they were sick and tired of the crime, sick and tired of kids that they thought should be in school because of their age, and they're running through their parking lots of their hotel or their apartment complexes or something like that with
there is a huge truancy issue
with guns and stuff like that. So they're wondering how we can do this. So they're coming up with their neighborhood watch program. But there was one space in particular at the corner of Sherwood Street and North Foster that was an abandoned used tire place that was left to just to Mother Nature after the flood of 2016. And being a used tire place, it had some tires on it, but if you have a spot where there's some dumping, it's a magnet for everybody else to say it's okay to dump there too.
Exactly.
So
it's always going to be dumping? Okay, cool.
Exactly. So my friend who was working with them, that group saw that I had done a cleanup under I-10 at Segan because there was homeless folks that were living in between the two 3-foot-high hip walls in this dead center underneath the overpass. Not on one side or the other side, right between the northbound and southbound 60, 70 mile an hour traffic, living in there with piles of clothes, and then they were running back and forth to that space. It was dangerous to them. It was dangerous to drivers that might miss them and all that stuff. So we did a cleanup over there and had EBRSO brought out St. Vincent de Paul to talk to the folks who were out there, try to get them services and all this kind of stuff. And some of these folks saw that and asked the guy that had the apartment complex, said, "What district do you live in?" He told them I was their council person. They said, "Could he do something to help us out? Because we've been asking for a year, writing emails to our council person in the mayor's office for a year. And we haven't even heard, thank you for your email, we'll see." No response at all.
Nothing. On
this location. And so Tommy's the guy that has the apartment complex. He called me on a Tuesday, and because this is just I love to do stuff. I love to do cleanups because it's really, it might be physically taxing, but it's so easy to do because you just go out and you attack the problem. If you know the people who can partner with you.
There's no red tape with doing it.
Exactly. If you know who to partner with, you can get stuff done pretty quick. So we talked on Tuesday. Friday, we cleaned up 630 plus tires that were inside of a building that was leaning over, about to fall, because it didn't have drywall or insulation on the inside. It was a shed type building.
Yeah.
Tires piled inside, tires all over the grounds, and we got them all the tires picked up. Got the great guys in the Department of Maintenance to come out with like you see from the garbage company. They got a big truck with a claw that comes down. They picked up the tires and they took it to one of the maintenance lots. Was able to call BRPD to have them out there with the lights on so nobody ran in the back of the truck while it was picking up the tires and all that stuff. And we cleaned that up. Then I had volunteers come the next day to pick up all the debris, and then Republic Services came out, and there was a couple of locations around there that were out of business where people just had bag trash that had been sitting there for months.
Yeah.
And because the place is empty, they're not paying a water bill, so they're not paying or they were commercial,
Yeah.
or they were a residence that wasn't paying a water bill, so they weren't paying a trash bill.
Exactly.
So they came, cleaned up that whole area. And man, Cheryl and Roland McGee that live right next door on Sherwood Street, they've been trying to get it cleaned up forever, because he's like, man, if you could clean it up, I'll just take my lawnmower over there and cut the weeds down that are growing so high they're pushing on our fence and all this kind of stuff. So to go up there and clean that up, that was wonderful, and that's what got me meeting with them on a monthly basis. First Tuesday of every month, we'd have a discussion of why we were here, what we wanted to do, what we could clean up next, what sort of things. I had people asking me, I got a guy that lives next door to me that's got about 10 or 12 washing machines in his yard that collect water, and it got grass growing up, like he's going to run some either scrap metal business or run some.
Why does he have 10 to 12 washing machines? Does he
Well,
just
see,
collect them?
Well, see, some people will collect that stuff because, one, he may want to do repairs, so he'll go pull parts off that. It's like a junkyard for this stuff. Or he's going to sell the scrap metal or something like that. Or he just started collecting them, think he's going to do some kind of business, and it doesn't really take off, and all of a sudden the grass is 3 feet high, and he doesn't have any way to move them. But the neighbors don't know how to report it in a way that takes an excuse for denial of service, if you follow what I mean. If somebody calls 311 and says this is going on, but maybe they don't know the address or something like that.
Yeah, it's hard for...
Exactly. So in meeting with these folks, they want to know, how can I make a change here? So it wasn't me going in and cleaning up stuff for them. It was me going and partnering with them, and the thirst for, how do I make sure this doesn't continue to happen? How can we change things between that first Tuesday and that fourth Saturday when we do a cleanup? How can I affect positive change in my neighborhood, because I don't know how to use the app, or I can download the app, but I don't know how to put in the correct information? What are some of the things that I need to do? And to anybody who's in management of any kind in any business, what a good manager does is it removes any excuse for your employees to be able to do their job. Okay. Give them the information, show them how to do everything. So I wasn't managing those folks, but I used that same principle of saying, everybody get out your phone. Everybody download the Red Stick Ready app. Now, if you wanted to do something about the washing machines, look through this for junk, trash, and debris in the yard. Take a picture. Look up the address, put the address in, and now you've taken away any excuse for somebody to deny you the service that you deserve for the taxes that you pay. So great learning every first Tuesday of every month, and then we would plan to do a cleanup on the fourth Saturday of every month. And we did, the first cleanup that we did after... We did the one cleanup not as a group. It was just Tommy and myself, and then some volunteers did that area that was the resale shop. Then they started talking about, they were saying, when Pearl or Cheryl or Miss Lynette and all these folks were saying, we got piles of garbage in front of people's houses that have been here also since the flood. So we drove through all 705 looking at, and they were real keen about saying, don't you dare go out. We're the 705 community action team. Let them get their own community action team somewhere else. We need to focus. We need the help here now. Let's not spread too thin. Let's focus on this. So we printed out a big map and got addresses where we had these big piles of trash. And we drove through and verified they were all still there, communicated with Republic saying, look, we need to get this stuff cleaned up. These folks are paying for this. It's making their world, their quality of life is terrible, and sometimes it's the abandoned house next door, but they're still paying for their trash to be picked up. So let's take care of it.
And I don't think people realize how cosmetic issues can affect a person's overall esteem about themselves, where they live, and everything. So that is a very important thing, and the fact that you're hands-on is impressive.
Well, you got a couple of things. You got people will complain about rats and snakes and stuff in this kind of stuff. Then it looks like, as what you're getting at, is somebody leaves their house and walks out into a world where I take care of my property, and I get together and take care of like where our school is or where our church is, but I can't do anything about 2 doors down.
Right.
That everybody's coming to my house. See, like, this is the area I live in. When I got 4 or 5 houses in the neighborhood where the windows are busted out, there's a blue tarp on the roof. Nobody's lived there for years, and the siding's gone on half the thing. Why can't we get that taken care of? Because that's a dangerous structure. Then by law needs to be condemned and needs to be torn down. So some of these areas we drove through and pull up, and he's got this big pile. And the guy's out in his carport changing the oil on his car with his dad. And I say, how long has the city let this bin sit here? He says, oh, that's all stuff I cleaned up from my yard that floated in my yard from the flood of 16. And I said, all right, your regular pickup day for this is Tuesday. If they don't come on Tuesday, I'm going to be here myself with somebody in a truck, and we're going to pick up on Saturday. And his response was, yeah, right.
I think that would be the
it's
natural
been
response.
there since 16. No kidding. Why would the guy believe anything anybody was saying from government that we were going to fix it? Because they've been complaining about this for going on 3 years now.
Right.
So practically almost 3 years. So we drove by, just real quick drove by. It was still there. I called Sharon Mann, who is the local, she runs Republic Services, and I said, look, I need you to have me a claw truck at Howell Park, 5:30 in the morning on Saturday. And we went around, we started picking up all the stuff, and I rode in the truck with the guy because that's just the way I like to do things. I like to have some boots on, I like to have some jeans on, I'll bring some gloves and hop out of the truck, and the recycling bin's full of stuff that's not recycling, some kind of dirty diapers and stuff a lot of times, because people would stop and get out and put something in a garbage can and keep on going.
Yeah.
And you got to separate tires from other stuff. So we started hitting it, we were nailing it. But the trip to go up to Samuels Road, where the landfill is, and come back, that was eating up so much time. And the landfill closes at 3 o'clock on Saturday. So I called Sharon Mann again. I said, look, we're not making the time that we need to. And I know you don't want to have your guy come out here and burn another Saturday running, my map out here doing this. And she got RCI, another company, to come out with another truck, just like with the claw on it, just like we were doing. We met him over at the Chicken Shack and tore the map in half, gave him half the map, and he took care of half of it. We took care of half of that, and we nailed all that stuff in a Saturday just by being focused. And a lot of the people that were in the 7805 Community Action Team are, and I don't think they'd be embarrassed with me saying this, are of an age where they're not going to pick up a big, heavy piece of, wood or something like that. But they can go out and they can see where everything is and phone call back and forth and have the motion of the truck be in a systematic way to make sure that we're not wasting time. We can be as efficient as possible and clean that stuff up. And I just drove up there through there yesterday because doing some work out at St. Gerard to put bike lanes and stuff on St. Catherine and St. Gerard, or up by the St. Gerard school and church up there. But you go through that area and some of that stuff has come back, because when you start cleaning up what's out in the street, trees are going to fall since then, and people will cut them up, and then people will clean up what's in the backyard and bring it forward, or people will come start dumping stuff. So that you need to keep having that proper maintenance come through. So you need to tear down
you can't just do a one and done.
Oh no, because you're not gonna look. The one thing you can do that is almost like a one and done is if you're really aggressive on tearing down condemnations, these dangerous structures that have already gone through the due process, and tear them down because they're the site where crime can happen. And unlike a pile of junk at the street, it's a structure itself that can hide criminal activity. Or I remember when I was a kid, and to show my age, I watched Indiana Jones in the theater, with the temple.
That does not show your full age. It's fine.
Okay.
I saw one of the Indiana Jones in the theater too.
Okay, gotcha. So
I'm not that old.
So there was an abandoned schoolhouse down the street from where I was at, and man, that was the place when you were a little kid to go play, because it was so interesting, and it was like Indiana Jones and all this other kind of stuff. Right. But if I fell through the second floor, I could have died. Yep. I could have stepped on a nail and get tetanus. Or somebody could have been waiting in there for me. Exactly. Or I could have stumbled on some kind of illegal activity that was happening there.
And then next thing you know, now you're in danger. And
exactly.
There's a plethora of things that can happen with these things. And I mean, like I said, I did my research, and I did see that one of the biggest things that you have gotten done on your time as being a councilman is the whole blight issue, because there is a lot of blight in the city. And like you said, you can just ride around and you see these old abandoned houses. No one's lived there for years. You got blue tarp, and it's just a haven for, like you said, rats, and snakes, and illegal activity. And these are things that need to be addressed.
And the litter on the ground, I was told someone went to go meet a guy that flew in. I'm ashamed to say he flew into the New Orleans airport instead of our airport here, but he flew into the New Orleans airport and drove up to Baton Rouge to look for a site where he was going to move a manufacturing part of his business. It was a large nationwide business. We're going to put a satellite office manufacturing facility here. And when they rode through and they saw, the gravel and dirt and debris that's along our curbs and where the islands are in the center and dump stuff in the ditches and all this kind of stuff, he said, you can turn me around. There's no way I'm going to ask my people to come down here because this shows how much respect you have for your own community. I'm not going to put my company here. And you can't argue with that guy's mentality because the whole thing is you're trying to win that guy over. And if that's something that's keeping a business from here, there's proof positive right now. We got to address that. We can't do business here unless we're ready to do business here.
Exactly. That reminds me of, I remember this happened to me in the third grade. Well, it didn't happen to me, but I remember it. And we had book reports to do. I went to Audubon Elementary, third grade. And the teacher, I turned mine in, and, you have to wait a couple of days, get your grade, because he has to review everything. I think I ended up with like a B. And there was this very, very smart girl in the class. She always had A's everywhere. And she got a C. And everybody was shocked when she got her paper. Like, she got a C? And I remember her, going up to the teacher's desk and like, why did I get a C? Yeah. He says, I took off a whole grade because you turned it in and your cover page had macaroni stains on it. And he said, you have to be aware of how it looks cosmetically as well, too. And that stuck with me. Like I said, that didn't even happen to me.
Yeah.
But I saw that, and ever since then, I'm like, yep, perception matters.
Yeah. You're quite a few years out of third grade, and it's still in the front of your head when it comes up.
That stuck with me because I'm like, I was happy for my B.
Sure.
And I'm like, man, maybe I could have got an A then. But it does bring me to another point because we have addressed the thing, one of the biggest things that you've achieved. But I want to ask you, as far as, because you're running for mayor, that means you've also identified multiple problems with Baton Rouge. So. The story you just said about the guy who flew in from New Orleans and drove up and can just turn me around. What other problems do you see, and how would a Watson administration address these type of issues? Just give me maybe top two, and how would a Watson administration address them?
Well, I'll give you the top three problems that we've got: crime, blight condemnations together as one, and drainage. Okay. Drainage is a big deal. Because I'll tell you, let's talk about drainage for a second.
Oh, please do, because we're on Wooddale right now, and if you hock a loogie on Wooddale, it floods.
Yeah, well, see, the thing is, right now, we got places in our community that never flooded before ever. That now we got people scared to death when we get a 2-hour rain on a Monday morning. Yeah. We got people, look, it's not my district, but I got people that live on Cherokee in the Garden District that call me, and you got cars that have water over the bottom line of the door going in and messing up people's cars.
My mother has PTSD from 2016.
Oh, yeah, she's not the only one. There plenty do.
She. I mean, if it rains for a couple hours, she's like, she's getting nervous.
The thing that I want people to realize and think about is flood insurance. People who have to buy flood insurance live in a flood zone, because it's expected that if we get a lot of rain, they would flood. In 2016, we had areas up off where Hurricane Bayou is off of Plank Road. Those folks don't have to have flood insurance. They're the high ground. Why did they flood? They flooded because the maintenance had not been done on the drainage system, because it rained on all of us.
My parents' home, when they purchased it, it was not a flood zone. So when it flooded in their home, now they're like, what do we do? Because when we bought this home,
correct,
it was told us, okay, you don't need flood insurance because you're not in a flood zone. So they weren't expecting it. The previous home that they had was in a flood zone, so they had, insurance on that, and they rent that out now. But with the home that they were in the area that they got it in, wasn't a flood zone.
Yeah,
it flooded.
So we got the most tragic thing is when people had loss of where they live and loss of all their possessions. That's first and foremost the worst thing. But then I start getting emails from people who have to pay for flood insurance that are saying, why am I paying $500 to $3,000 in flood insurance? We have the worst flood in record that we remember in 16, and I don't even get water in my yard. Why am I paying for flood? They want to get out of having to pay flood insurance because they think the maps are wrong.
Yeah.
And you got people who should never have to pay for flood insurance because the elevation of the ground where they live, that got water in their house. And the whole reason for that is lack of maintenance in these bayous. Lack of maintenance in where the pipes are that go underneath streets. Just getting stuff cleaned out. There was something that was, in one of these waterways, somebody had a gigantic ice machine or something like just dumped in it, and you could see it from the street. You got Clay Cup Bayou in my district, so I got a whole lot of complaints about that one.
You see a lot of interesting people because just in this conversation, you've had someone who had 10 to 12 washers in their yard, and now you got an ice.
I mean, that's just
hang around some interesting constituents.
The thing is, I'm talking to people who have their eyes open, and they're seeing what's going on, and they haven't gotten used to it. And some of these problems we've got are because people gotten used to the problem. You've ever been in somebody's house and it smelled bad when you first went in the house, but you spend a little bit more time there.
They're nose blind.
And you get nose blind to it. People are getting blind to some of the litter and some of the blight and all this kind of stuff, and it's terrible. But I'll tell you what, when you clean it up, or when that house you were in that smelled bad gets aired out, man, wow,
sure.
My goodness, what a new world we live in now. So these folks that are out there, because no one person, certainly if I'm blessed enough to become mayor president, there's no way that these two eyes are going to see every problem in the municipality. I'm going to need to communicate with everybody and listen. And I want everybody to bring their problems to me so I can organize how we attack those problems. But when you just look, my dad laid brick when I was a kid growing up, and I remember him, and I feel just as nerdy as he is as I thought he was. He laid brick, and we would drive through town. He'd go, "People pay money for that." He would look at other people's work and say that looks awful, and
just throwing major shade.
Exactly. So every time anybody that rides with me in a car, every time I go over a bridge, I slow down, I look either way to see what the drainage looks like either way, just because while I'm there, why don't I check that?
Right.
I don't necessarily, unless I see some problem, I won't, my kids won't go, "Oh, geez, Dad." But I'll stop if there's something bad, and I'll take some pictures of it and see how we can get it remedied.
Right.
But I want people to tell me. And every time I meet with people, I tell them, I want you to tell me what the problems are. So we can make a list and we can form a game plan so we can move forward.
Okay. Now, with being an elected official, you're running for mayor. And you did bring up COVID as well, too. But just things around us are changing. The atmosphere in the air, it's been extremely tense this year. And like I said, I think COVID has something to do with that. But also it's just it's a lot of tension as far as race is even concerned as well, too. And they've coined this term that America is having this racial reckoning right now. As an elected official, how are you prepared to deal with the current atmosphere of a racial reckoning? Well,
I'll tell you what. First and foremost, I would think, if those who are listening that don't see, I'm white. just to let you know, if you had a white mayor going into an area that's predominantly African American to deliver services that they've been denied for 40 years because it's the right thing to do, because they're owed those services, I think first and foremost, that's a great way of starting a conversation and building trust. Building trust not just in me being the mayor president at the time, but government itself. Because I'm telling you what, the problems that are up in North Baton Rouge, where you see blighted buildings or condemned buildings or blight, or in Old South or in Gardere or even out in the country or anywhere where there's problems, that didn't happen overnight.
No.
So a lot of these places, it's been 40 years in the making. And it shouldn't take, there's a lot that could have been done in the last 4 years that hadn't been done.
Yeah.
But you got to be real aggressive. I'd like to do what I think should be done in 4 years. I'd like to do as much as we can to be aggressive and take care of it in the first year and be out there side by side with people. And a lot of that, as you said when we started out with Table Talk, of having a discussion back and forth. We're talking about ideas. We're sharing ideas. And when I go out to go clean something up or go meet with somebody, anybody that comes up, I'll start a conversation with them. And that's just me. I like to think I never met a stranger because I'll go up and start talking to anybody.
Right.
And ask questions and listen, something that not a lot of politicians do. They like to tell you, they don't like to hear from you. So I listen and I talk to folks, and over time you make some great relationships with people, and they introduce you to other people. They'll vouch for you to help speed up that getting to know you attitude. But just getting out and providing services to people so they see a practical, on-the-ground change in their life, that's huge.
Right.
Law enforcement is a huge elephant in the room when it comes to difficulties with race across the country.
Exactly.
So I've spoken with former chiefs of police. I speak with police officers, black folks, white folks, men, women who are police officers. I talk to firefighters to tell me what they see about when they go someplace where the police are involved. I know a whole lot about the interaction that folks have.
Yeah.
For starters, we've got a major crime problem in this town when you've got 90 plus people losing their life well before their time because of violent crime. That's serious.
Yeah.
It was serious when it was a decade low 61 in 2016. That was still 61 people who lost their life before their time.
Right.
But it's gotten so bad, and I talk to folks in some of the neighborhoods that have such a high density of these victimizations, these spaces where these crimes occur. And when you go out and you talk to them, and I don't go out and talk to them, the night it happens, where you've got everyone's like charged up about it.
Right. Because
I'm not the mayor yet. I'm not the chief of police. I'm not a police officer.
Right.
I got to let people do their job, be out there. But when you talk to these folks that open up, they want to have a police presence out there. Because I'll tell you what, someone who lives in 7805 or 07, or the majority of people in this entire parish can't afford to live in a gated community where they come up and they got to type in a code to get inside, and they have enough money to pay for a security guard to drive around. I mean, you want to defund the police, the only people who got protection are the richest of us all.
Right.
So first start I would do is create an assistant chief administrative position in the mayor's office that's completely over public safety. Would work with BRFD, EMS, and BRPD, and be a liaison to the other fire departments we have, because we got plenty between the volunteer fire department, St. George, East Side Fire Department, and be a liaison to the sheriff's office. But through their work with BRPD, have community meetings and talk directly with, when hopefully we get to a time where we can have large groups of people get back together again. Talk to large groups of people and make a presentation where I would be present, leadership from the police department would be present, my assistant chief administrative officer over public safety would be present, and we would discuss, here's a map, here's the crimes that are happening in this area, here's the amount of gunshots fired that have been picked up by ShotSpotter technology. Here's the number of people who've been shot and didn't die. Here's every burglary. Here's all these things that are happening where you're at. And have professional police officers say, we know these are the methods in which to fight this crime. And let's have a frank conversation. Do y'all want us to fight crime? Because this is the way we know works. And have that discussion and say, look, are you bought into the methodology to fight crime? Because having police officers go out and watch, let's call it what it is, the 100 and some shots fired on Plank Road, and there's a crazy party with all these people together in the street, and they're not wearing masks, they're not socially distanced, but that's kind of over here. But to have all these folks get in a situation, when you listen to the tape, which I listened to that tape, I can tell the difference between calibers of weapons from when I hear the shots. There's multiple weapons being fired out there. When you get 100, it wasn't one gun that fired 100 shots. It's a variety of them. But when you had a party-like atmosphere that was getting later and later and later at night, and more alcohol is consumed in a very public space, and you had, I've seen videos of that instance earlier in the night where people were doing donuts in the road, and they're like holding weapons outside the window.
Right.
You got to have an interaction with people to say, hey, it's getting pretty hot out here, meaning the tension level is going to build up because of the alcohol and what have you. Maybe we ought to cool it off, and maybe we ought to have folks. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. We can't be all here together in these amount of numbers of people, because eventually you're going to get people who don't like each other are going to run into each other out here, and we don't want things to come to a head.
Yeah, and with that, and I mean, because we did bring up the police presence, so that was basically a lack of police presence.
There were police officers out there, but from what I've heard, they were out there to observe but not engage until things got to a point where they had no choice but to engage. And when the shots began to be fired, that's when they engaged.
So more reactive than proactive.
Exactly. And that's the thing. You can't save someone from being the victim of a crime if the way you interact with the community is to just wait until the crime happens and then go take a report.
Now, do you think that they're skittish about interacting because of the tension in the air between community and police?
Absolutely. No, not between community and police. Between the current leadership and the very well-known community activists in this area that have made some decent amount of money selling ads on their podcasts and things like that. Now you, because it's your first one, but by having a very heated discussion about race, and having that be a touch point that gets people fired up, so people want to see what the next thing is. Because, I mean, look, Fox News can put something out that's totally to the right, but gets people riled up and angry. Exactly. And if all you do is sit at home and you watch Fox News all day long in an echo chamber, you're waiting for the next thing to come out, and you don't want to hear anything that disagrees with the way you think, so you keep watching Fox News.
It can't penetrate the atmosphere.
Correct.
And you do have people, that lean more left or lean more right. Where it's like, now it's like you can't even penetrate that atmosphere. I've said this from jump as well too, because you brought up defund the police. Mm-hmm. I hate that. I think that's a horrible choice of words, because I've read what they're trying to do, and I understand what that is. But by saying defund the police, as far as from a marketing standpoint, I think it's a horrible choice of words, because now the only thing people are hearing is you're basically putting the police out of business, and crime is gonna, people's imagination will go from here to there to all over the place. I think it's horrible. I think if the goal is to try to create other services within a police, that sounds, reasonable. Let's look at that. But as far as the term defund the police, and I've had discussions with people like this before, I think that's a horrible, but that's my marketing mind looking at it like that. That's not gonna fly. There's
two general populations, and I know I'm overgeneralizing, but there's two general populations that stand by the terms defund the police. There's one that wants to take money from the police to get revenge against the police because it's motivated by anger, and the name defund the police feeds their narrative, and they don't want to let go of that title. But folks that are standing for what you're talking about, and I would agree with you. You have another generalized group that, just like we were talking about, that want to see other services. Now, you cannot take... I've talked to folks that are... I talked to somebody who's a 10-year veteran of being a social worker.
Right.
And having the discussion... This is probably 4 weeks away from the George Floyd incident. And this defund the police idea is coming up. And it's primarily amongst folks that wanted that take the money away from the police for revenge issue. That was what was bubbling to the top. And because news wants to sell crazy stuff, and they'd rather show a fire than show somebody winning a spelling bee, because negativity sells.
People don't realize with a 24-hour news cycle, they have to fill time. So... some of it, they're going to have some of that footage on just repeat. They're going to, like you said, they want to sell the fire. So they're going to have the fire going for 6 hours straight to fill that time.
Look, I noticed this growing up. If you watch a car race, the highlights of a car race are going to be the 7 wrecks that happened and the just the waving of the checkered flag when they won.
Right.
That's going to be the story of that. And when we had a hockey team down here, people who didn't know the rules of hockey, they wanted to see the fight.
Right.
And that's not necessarily part of the game of hockey. It's part of the game of hockey, but it's not that big. But that was what put butts in the seats.
That's all they saw on SportsCenter.
Exactly.
And they said,
exactly.
we got a hockey team now? Well,
exactly.
When do they fight?
Exactly. So you cannot take a social worker that's maybe the best social worker ever and put in a situation. I'll give you an actual situation that I wouldn't say I partook in, but I witnessed and made the phone call to the 389-2000 non-emergency number. I called BRPD because there was a woman whom I know is developmentally challenged, but she's older, and she was trying to cross diagonally Perkins Road at Essen at about 3 in the afternoon with all that traffic. It's hard enough to do it at one of the actual things, but diagonally. I mean, so I'm calling them like, look, she's going to get hit or somebody's going to avoid her and get an accident, et cetera, et cetera. You're going to have to, one, have a vehicle that's got a siren and lights on to get you as quickly as possible to that location. Then you need to have that same type of vehicle be able to park in the road to make the other drivers stop driving through the area. Those practical things have to happen. And then two, that officer will have to understand to keep a 20-foot distance from that person until they can make a diagnosis of whether that person is dangerous to anyone who would try to interact with them.
Right.
Because look, you can go on YouTube, you can watch a guy walking down the street who's on PCP. Looking at what I saw in that video versus what I saw there, the action will look exactly the same. But when you approach that situation all they're trying to do is remove that person from the roadway to get them out of danger, which is the other vehicles, right, and remove that person from causing a danger to the other vehicles. But if this person is going to snap and become violent right away, you need to have someone who can try to contain that. Now, in London, they've got 2 layers of policing. There's one that's your police as we know it, and there's another group that go through academy just like the police, but they don't have arresting powers. They're allowed to use. They have mace for self-defense, and they wear a button like an alert button so that any police officers who are nearby can respond as quickly as possible if they need help. That's not always going to work. Sometimes they're going to have to go to a location with a police officer, but you need to have some folks who can address some of these problems that police can't solve.
Someone who's trained to deal with someone, like you said, who may be challenged in a certain way like that. So they don't know, that woman that was crossing the street, she didn't know the gravity of the situation that she was in or placing other people in. Calling a cop out there, that may not be the best solution to
right now it's the only solution.
Exactly. But and that's why I'm saying, as far as just kind of, bringing that full circle is
you got. I'll give you one more. This is an instance that a police officer told me about. There is a young man who lives with his folks, probably 15, 16 years old, who has schizophrenia. And sometimes he starts skipping his medication. Maybe he misses one by accident, and now his symptoms make him not want to take his medication because he's tapped into reality now because he's not on his medication. And it gets to a point where the family, it's now nighttime, and the family needs help because he's getting loud. He might throw something, he might do something else, and they need someone to help them manage the situation because they can't manage it on their own. But when the police get the phone call, this police officer is like, this is going to be the 8th time I've been to that house this month. And no matter how many times I go out there, we're not solving the problem. I can't go out there and make this person take their medication.
Right.
I can't go out there and force medication on anybody. The coroner is the only person who has the right to put somebody on a hold because they're a danger to themselves or somebody else. So we do need to have something that can go out there and help, because if this family doesn't have the means to have a general practitioner or a regular doctor that they can see, and it's after hours, if these folks have been using the emergency room as their primary care physician, if they can't get him in a car, or if they call 911 about this and the 911 operator asks, is anyone injured? No. It moves from EMS to whatever law enforcement agency covers that area. And if it's in the city, it's BRPD. So they go out and they'll know the family, and they just have to be in a situation where somebody talks to this person into taking some medication, or get somebody else who could talk, or be there in case something happens. And you've now, not to say that it's not noble to be there and try to help this person, but when you're in a situation where you've got so few police officers that you only have 4 officers per district at any one time, and one of the officers is at that house for the 8th time this month, knowing that all the other 7 times I didn't really affect any positive permanent change, something else has got to happen. There might be a crime happening somewhere else that now this person has to leave, and maybe something escalates because they left. Somebody's got to get in there and be able to affect. And I think the Bridge Center as a crisis intervention center, once that's up and running, that's going to be a huge tool to try to help this community. But at the same time, having a partnership, because when I went to San Antonio to look at their Bridge Center, their crisis intervention center, the thing that they said was most important, you've got to have buy-in with the police, because the police are going to be, when you first start this, they're going to be the primary delivery system of people who need help to the place where help is given. Whether it be that person walking in the street, somebody else who maybe need to be detoxed from something that they're on, maybe some public drunkenness. But you know what? If this person gets arrested for public drunkenness, that might mark them for the rest of their life and ruin their career, that they could have had a successful path. But taking them to some place where they could detox might be the best way to de-escalate a situation and have them move forward in a more positive way and learn from the situation. Because I'll tell you what, getting picked up by a cop and taken to a Bridge Center and going and waking up in a situation like that, it'd be a real wake-up call to a lot of people.
True.
In other ways, it's getting people connected with services they might not have even known are available to them, and get them into a continuum of care so they can be, for their own accord, but for also society, to be more productive.
Now, you may mention, like you said, this might be the 8th time that this police officer maybe has even responded to a call like that. And it kind of makes me think about, this is something else that was kind of like a hot topic last year, community policing. You have a lot of officers who may not even live in the area. If they're not from the area, then they feel a little bit of a disconnect there. Do you feel that if more officers lived in the area that they policed, they would have a better connection and in turn could police better the community as a whole?
The more time that police officers have to interact with the community outside of the calls that they're on, that's going to make the relationship so much better. But I'll go back to the fact that we got 120 officers short right now of the number of officers we're supposed to have. And if you've got if you've got a lot of criminal activity happening that's getting a phone call where an officer is just stopping to just get a cup of coffee to help stay awake and stay alert, and they don't even have time going from call to call to even get to know the person on the other side of the counter they're buying the coffee from, that's to me, that's bad.
Yeah.
Look, it's nice that we have a group of police officers that are called community police officers that actually have it embroidered on their shirt, but every officer should be a community police officer. It shouldn't be a group of people. It should be every single officer should be able to get to know the community, and the community should know who they are. It's very difficult to do that when you're missing so many officers. I'll give you a prime example of when you have when you have enough officers for them to interact with the community. I was watching this was 2 years ago, ESPN covering the World Little League Championships, World Series of Little League. And watch these little kids come out and their names on their back of their shirts, and the announcer says, "I want you to look at the names of the back of their shirts." That's not that kid's last name. It's the last name of every one of the officers in their area that has come out and donated time to teach hitting ground balls, catching balls, or mowing the field, or all these officers that have come out and helped these little kids. And each one of these kids has taken one of the officers' last name, and that's what they're wearing on the back of their jersey. That's how are we going to have our police officers here have enough time to interact when they're in the bottom 10% of pay in the country, so they've got to go take another job working at a gas station or working at a convenience store or working at a supermarket to pick up an extra 4 hours to supplement their income because they're paid in the bottom 10% in the country.
Which they shouldn't have to. I mean, when you think of an officer, you think that's their career.
Sure.
As opposed to now they have to go and moonlight and do security elsewhere. Or like you said, have to go and pick up a shift at a grocery store just to continue making ends meet.
Sure.
They should be able to focus on just being in that one career. I agree. So we have talked about that, and I do like the answer as far as every officer should be considered a community officer.
Absolutely.
Because how do you gain the trust of the people that you're going to be around if they don't know you?
There are officers that live way on the east side of the parish that are up in District 1 in Dixie, and they've been there long enough. They know the folks that live up there. They know, they interact with the business owners that are up there. So much so that, if they go, one in particular knows the people so well that if this officer gets called to go to a bar fight at a bar, and this is a white officer goes in, and now somebody's had a little bit to drink or getting a little chippy, somebody else will go, no, they're cool. Because they've had enough time to meet people in the neighborhood, knowing this isn't some hothead that's going to, go John Wayne on anybody.
Right.
But is answering and going to get to the bottom of what's going on. A professional police officer, because there's nothing that's more damaging to good police officers than a bad police officer. And good police officers just need to have the opportunity to have the time to get to know people in their community. And if their shift from start to finish is running from place to place, and then when they do have time, when they're not running to a call, catching up on the paperwork that those calls create, they don't have time to really interact except for when they're on a call.
Right. Now, I kind of want to stay on the subject of policing and how they interact with people. Just last week, the big story that was in the news was the vote came up for the Sterling family. And we know that was, that grabbed national headlines when that happened in 2016. It was just bad.
Certainly.
But there was a vote that came up about settling with the Sterling family. Talk about that a little bit as far as, because I saw that it was voted down.
Okay. I was one of the folks that voted against it. And let me say this, the wording of the agenda item wasn't a settlement. It wasn't as though the Sterling heirs and their attorneys had come to terms with the parish attorney's office for $5 million and then council was just approving that expenditure.
Right.
This was an offer of judgment. So it's as though we had 4 council members that came up with $5 million and threw that out there as something that the Sterling family's attorney
so they had nothing to do with that at all.
Not at all. They could have said, no thanks, I'll pass. And at the same time, it would have been a $5 million benchmark out there that would have been part of evidence of the trial that previously we had members of council, or if council had voted in favor of that would have been part of the evidence going forward. But not to get too much into there's a whole lot of stuff that we're told and not told, unfortunately, by the parish attorney's office, that all the members of the council are the clients of the parish attorney's office. So there's a lot of stuff that if you go back and even look at some of the other council meetings where some council member will say, can I say this? Can I say this? And it's warned by the parish attorney that no, if one council member said something to reveal something that was said in executive session, they'd be violating the attorney-client privilege of the other 11 council members,
right.
Which is why we have executive session. So there's a lot of discussions we have where we're together and we can ask questions of the parish attorney, because in any legal proceeding going forward, the client and the attorney have an opportunity to speak where it's not necessarily made widely known. Because there's a lot of stuff that the public wants to know, and I absolutely understand why the public wants to know what it is. But the other party on the other side of the lawsuit is a member of the public, and they'll also be hearing what we're having as far as a discussion, which is why long before anybody was currently on the council, the executive session was created so that the clients of the parish attorney could have a confidential meeting with the parish attorney to get information. in one space and have a lot of questions, because if you get in any group of people and you've got an expert in a field, somebody may ask a question that makes you think of a question you didn't necessarily have if you'd went and visited with them by themselves. It might jar some other question you may have. So there's a lot more information that I think each council person needs to hear, and there's a whole lot of folks who are very concerned about the lack of information. The lack of information is being voluntarily given to council from the parish attorney's office. I think there's a lot of stuff that we need to know, and given that vote the other night as an offer of judgment, that would not have any way, shape, or form would have ensured any kind of settlement or end of the case,
right,
by any means. But there were so many questions that came up about certain pieces of paperwork or certain things that should have been reported that weren't offered to council members that we need to know. And I'm not an attorney. And until I had attorneys in the community that said, hey, did y'all get this XYZ? And I'm like, no, I didn't get XYZ. Why wouldn't I have gotten that?
Yeah.
And I'm only hearing about this 3 hours before the meeting we're talking about. So you heard in the meeting that Councilwoman Banks tried to set up a meeting to speak with the parish attorney and was denied access to have a meeting with the parish attorney, when by the plan of government, council as a whole and each individually is the boss of the parish attorney. So to have your direct employee deny, whether it's me or whether it's Shauna, that's not right to be denied a meeting with your attorney representation.
right.
So there's a whole lot of stuff that still needs to be worked out as far as the process on our end to get our ducks in a row. And
Because the way the story was
Sure.
framed, and like I said, we're just kind of dialoguing about this, but the way the story was exchanged, and I from what I was reading, Councilwoman Banks was trying to say that this is something that they want to get cleared up before the new year, and that was her motivation. But from what you're telling me just now, the family had zero to do with what was being proposed.
they very well may have liked the idea of the $5 million mark. We had no knowledge ahead of time. There was no meeting where people said, where anyone signed anything that if council will approve this, then it's done. None of that existed.
So
None of that existed.
You could have easily still been open to something else further down the
Absolutely.
road.
They could have come back and said, no, we want 10. No, we want 12. It wouldn't have ensured any guarantee that there would have been any closure to this by voting for that.
Sticking kind of on the aftermath of the Alton Sterling story, knowing what we know now, we've ad nauseum, we've read, we've seen video, we've seen, the video was plastered all over the world. In your opinion, do you feel the officer that murdered Mr. Sterling handled that situation properly?
Well, I'll tell you, you use the word murder, and I would like to say, obviously he killed Alton Sterling. Murder being something is like an intention to go to commit bodily harm to end someone's life. There's a definition with that. I don't necessarily think that anyone arrived at that location with the intent of anyone losing their life. I don't think that at all.
Okay.
I don't think Alton Sterling intended to kill anyone when he apparently motivated someone to call about him showing a gun, and so the other person felt threatened. I don't think Alton Sterling was trying to, would have escalated to that necessarily. I know Howie Lake showed up and wasn't doing anything that was going to take it to that level. I don't think Officer Salamone was going to, or former Officer Salamone was going to take it to that situation. But
and just viewing the video, I believe the interaction between Officer Lake and Alton Sterling, it seemed like Lake had the situation under control. Unless I have the officers confused. The first officer that was
the
there.
first officer there was Officer Lake. That's
Okay.
correct.
So the video that I saw with Salamone, he comes in and he seems, again, my opinion, rather aggressive. I feel like Officer Lake had the situation under control before Salamone showed up, and it seemed like his presence kind of intensified the situation in a sense. And like I said, I know he's a former officer now.
Both of them are former officers now.
Okay, but I do feel that Lake had the situation under control.
From my recollection, and look, I'll say this: I've watched the video, but it's been some time since I watched the video. Because right now, what I'm trying to go through, what we're trying to do as council is to figure out what are the legal ramifications, and then unfortunately, the law puts certain dollar amounts on certain activities that happen and all this kind of stuff. So
a lot of moving parts.
I've got to learn all those moving parts. And like I said, I'm not an attorney, so there's a lot for me to learn.
Yeah.
And to have an attorney walk in that's not their expertise and learn it, they're at a much higher level than I am coming in and even learning the base ground to go up to this. So it's been some time since I watched it, but I can picture in my mind what you're talking about. But if you have a situation where Officer Lake is trying to get someone to do something and there's not an opportunity for Lake and Salamone to communicate with one another, and Salamone comes right out and may think that Officer Lake is in danger or something like that, I can't tell you what was going through Blaine Salamone's head when he got out of that car and approached the situation.
Sure.
Nobody can. Only he can. So, I mean, you've heard what the police chief said about Officer Salamone. I'll tell you what, it's unfortunate when anyone loses their life. Could it have been different? I think everyone that's involved would have liked it to have ended differently. Absolutely. If someone's loss of life could have been avoided, I think that would have been the choice everyone made, because I don't think necessarily that was the solution. That was certainly not the best for Alton Sterling, certainly not the best for his family, but certainly I don't know if it would be. I just don't think that was the intention when folks came out there. I don't think that was the intention when former Officer Salamone went out there. And when everything happened in the very short amount of time, and we all have the benefit of going back, as you said, it's all over the internet and people can watch it over and over and over and over again. And not to make this seem petty at all, but there's a lot of people on Monday morning will talk about what Drew Brees should have done on Sunday. So to have all that happen in so few seconds, and for either one of us to not know what was going through his head, but I don't believe for a second that any officer shows up to a situation saying, I'm going to shoot this person. I think they get into a situation and it moved very fast, and I'm not a trained police officer either. And I've only been the victim of violent crime. I've never been an officer who's going to break up violent crime.
Right.
So to say that he was or wasn't acting in the scope of what he's supposed to do, that's part of the trial that's going on with both of those officers right now. And I think that would be the determination from both BRPD experts and Officer Salamone and Officer Salamone's attorney. And the city is party to that lawsuit as well, in so much as where the contract is to defend, an officer in that situation. But how this comes out in the court, it may very well come out against Officer Salamone. It may come out that Officer Salamone acted in a way that's outside of the scope of training, and then he would end up owing possibly the city for his legal defense, plus be on the hook for the $5 million, rather than the city be on the hook for the $5 million. So there's so many moving parts right now that are in the hands of the court.
Okay. Now, kind of shifting gears a little bit, with you running for mayor, I kind of want to revisit that.
Sure.
So EBR is been considered like a Democratic stronghold almost. We've Mayor Holden served 3 terms. Mm-hmm. Mayor Broome is at the end of her first term. How does a Republican come in and try to break that stronghold?
Well, for starters, I am a Republican, but I don't think that ideology is the way we solve anything.
And the reason why I'm bringing it up too is because politics has become so tribal.
Oh my goodness, has it ever?
I think Democrats and Republicans have almost, to me, in my opinion, when I see Democrat, Republican, I see Crips and Bloods almost, because it's like I've never seen a time where, and again, you and I talked before we even started filming, I said my favorite subject in school was history. Mm-hmm. I don't remember a time where it was this tribal, where it's like, I can remember when Hurricane Sandy hit, and at the time President Obama went to Jersey, and the Republican Party threw Chris Christie away for taking a picture with the guy. and he's dealing with a natural disaster. To me, that was a level of petty I've never seen in politics before, where it's like it's a natural disaster, the president comes in to try to help, and you throw the guy away because he's photographed with it.
Whether you like a president or not, whether it's Barack Obama or whether it's Donald Trump or whoever it is, whatever it is, that's a lifeline for you to get federal funding to help you in a disaster. That even if you want to just think about it, I'm going to swallow my pride because a check is coming.
Right.
You need to do that to get along to help your constituents. And I'll tell you what, that's what needs to happen. The federal level is absolutely the worst when it comes to this tribalism stuff. Because I'll tell you what, Lindsey Graham and I can't remember it was an ardent Republican and ardent Democrat. And they disagreed on the floor. They fought all the time, but they go have dinner with each other all the time. Their wives were good friends, and they were friends with each other all the time. Mm. I would like to see that. But the thing is, the reason that stuck in my mind, just like that macaroni stain on that book report, is because I can count that one instance on one finger. It should be the reverse should be the exception to the rule.
Right.
So I don't see any reason, really. I'll make this statement, and I've made it before. I don't see any reason why we have political parties other than the fact of having a brand like Coke or Pepsi or something like that on people. At a municipal level, when it comes to Metro Council people and even the mayor, to have so much onus of saying, oh, you're this party, and therefore I can define you based on what everyone else that has that same letter next to their name does. The council people and the mayor the job is a glorified custodian or superintendent for the area, because we are solving.
I've never heard it described.
We are solving problems on the ground. Look, if you live in an apartment complex and the toilets weren't flushing and the lights in the hallway weren't working, the elevator was broken, if the superintendent fixed all that stuff, would you give a damn whether they were Republican or Democrat? No, because their job is to fix stuff. And that's what should happen. And what happens is when people get riled up in petty politics, that's when the elevator stays broken an extra 6 months. That's when the lights don't flicker and don't get a bulb replaced.
That's when it takes 16 months for...
Yeah, exactly. Could be. But, we have folks in our community that pay taxes every day. They go buy a pair of shoes, there's sales tax on them. Whether they pay property tax or not, we've got folks that pay a humongous amount of sales tax. And it's sales tax is a regressive tax, so it hits people who are in a lower economic strata more than people in a higher economic strata, because they spend so much more of what they earn on what they need to survive.
Right.
Groceries, food, shoes, clothes, rent, stuff like that. Like the necessities of life make up the vast majority of what their paycheck is. So those folks, I would say it's almost I don't want to say like a national defense sort of thing, but these folks need to get the services that they deserve, because they're paying so much more out of how much they get in pay toward the budget and receive so much less out of the budget. Mm-hmm. And you don't just go, I'm going to go pave your road. Well, okay, you paved a road that went by a bunch of buildings that don't have roofs and all this kind of stuff, and there's a bunch of crime in the neighborhood. How about solve those problems? Because the road is drivable. But I realize it's election time, so let's go pave the road so everybody can see this fancy road. But the sidewalks are busted up, and if it rained, you wouldn't be able to see the road anyway because it'd be under a foot of water. Mm-hmm. That's not a solution. You need to go out and have equitable spending based on what people are paying in, but have it make all the sense in the world of solving the problems that the folks in certain areas need to get fixed. So, to me, did that sound like a Republican answer? Did that sound like a Democratic answer? I don't think it sounded like either one.
Like an answer.
It's a practical answer, and that's what I stand for. Because look, ideology is an argument, and sometimes it's a petty argument, and maybe that's ideology is what people complain about and argue about over Thanksgiving dinner. But if there's no food for Thanksgiving, or the house is falling down, or somebody couldn't make it because they got shot on the way to Thanksgiving, what difference does ideology have to do with anything? You got to fix the practical problems that affected what happened. And to me, practical change on the ground in our community and getting started and getting moving really quick before we get into a situation where we lose businesses and we can't bring businesses in, because you can't work in Baton Rouge if there's no work in Baton Rouge. You've got to make the place ready to have people work. You got to train the people that live here to be part of a 21st century workforce, to plug in, because I mean, if people can be out there working and making a living, they're going to feel better about themselves. They're going to own the change in their community. If you can make people part of the change in their community, they're going to own it, they're going to defend it, and they're going to feel better about their lives, and they're going to take it to that next level. If we can change, if we can build affordable housing in North Baton Rouge, for example, and change that area that is so much held where it is economically because it's a rental economy rather than a wealth building through equity building, home ownership economy, you're keeping people at the same level rather than have them pay the same amount of money they pay in rent in a mortgage to own a house, and then it's like they're putting in a savings bank. And now that changes the way people think about life, changes the way they think about future. And when you've got young kids coming up saying, I may never make 28, so I'll make decisions based on there maybe no tomorrow. Those are the kind of people who get either involved in crime or don't fight the peer pressure to get involved in crime. And that's no way to run a city. That's no way to give an example to the people who live here. So I don't think any of the things I've said were Republican or Democrat. No. I think all of that is fixing stuff. I mean, have your shoes untied, tie the shoe.
That's it. No discussion about it.
That's it.
Now, I did have one more point that
sure.
I want to bring up, and this is something that I've looked at. We actually covered it on one of our previous programs we produced. The current Secretary of State. Mm-hmm. He is in a position that's different for a lot of politicians. A lot of people don't realize that the Secretary of State, as far as in Louisiana, he can be affiliated with a party, and I'm bringing this up because we were just talking about party affiliation. But there's a state statute that says that they can't campaign for anyone else outside of themselves. They can't appear at campaign rallies. During the last governor's election, our current Secretary of State showed up at a rally for Eddie Rispone. He's on camera, and he's verbally hyping the crowd up, saying, hey, we're going to win with this guy, we're going to win with that guy. Does that put our election process, does it taint it a bit when the chief elections officer is openly doing things in that nature that could potentially, and I would hate for it to get down to a point where now people don't have faith in the votes that were counted, because now they're looking at tape of him endorsing candidates. So, people are already conspiracy theorists. I don't want people to feel like, oh, he tipped this, he put his finger on the scale. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, for starters, if you say that he did this, I believe you. I haven't seen the tape. I mean, I wasn't.
I'll show it to you when we finish.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. I mean, you can send a link to me. I'll look at it. I'll look at it when we're done here. I don't disbelieve you that it happened, but I wasn't aware that it happened. So this is the first time hearing of it. As far as the rules and regulations on Secretary of State and what limits Kyle Ardoin's behavior as far as politicking, I mean, I know that civil servants are limited by the Hatch Act, that they can't go out and politic, and Kyle Ardoin's at a much higher level with a lot of eyes on him. So I would need to, I'm not going to put my foot in my mouth here and make a comment one way or another. But, if that's the case where they can't go do something like that, I can understand why somebody might feel like the fix is in. But at the same time, you've got the governor who can come in from the other party, come in and sort of regulate some of the stuff that Kyle Ardoin does. And there's a lot of checks and balances within that. There's been a lot of discussion about mail-in ballots and things of that nature, because that's the reality of where we're at right now.
Right.
And whether it's going to help one party or another, I'm telling you right now, the mail system is horrible right now.
Who you telling?
I'm just saying.
Oh, I'm fully aware.
I mean, I got something sent to me from Doug Wellborn's office about just information about the candidacy, and it was sent certified mail. And the mail carrier ripped off where I was supposed to sign to prove that I'd received it and shoved it through the mail slot.
Oh, there's been
That's
numerous...
if I got the mail.
Exactly. There have been numerous stories where mail carriers just dump the mail off on the side of the road.
On Esplanade, that's part of my district. So I got a Facebook message that had photographs of somebody was building a house or they're remodeling a house. And they had a roll-off dumpster in their front yard, and the explanation was one of the workers dumped a bucket of debris into the roll-off because it's taller than this person was, dumped it in, and said, wait a minute, my hammer's in there. So he goes up in there to get the hammer and notices there's all this mail, including people's Entergy bills and credit card bills and all this kind of stuff. Think about how that messes up maybe somebody's credit. Maybe it could mess up somebody getting their electricity turned off or something like that because the mail carrier just dumped it. So I wish there was a better way, a more trusted way of conveying a message one way or another. And people make the comment all the time is like, take $100 out of your wallet and mail it to yourself. Do you think you're going to get it back?
No.
Or would you try? You may or may not, but would you rather keep it in your pocket? If you needed to go pay a bill with $100 and the place was down the street, would you rather take the $100 down there yourself, or would you rather mail it?
I'm taking it.
Exactly.
Every time.
I've had some communication back and forth, even where someone did a two-day flat letter rate and sent me a picture of the receipt, and the letters just disappeared.
I've had some interesting things with the Postal Service there.
Well,
I'll say that.
I'll tell you, it's right now with COVID and wanting to make sure that everyone gets the opportunity to vote and that every vote counts and every vote is recorded. Right now with COVID and the difficulties that are going to happen at each polling location and all the moving parts right now to try to solve those issues, to make sure that we have as transparent and open election process as possible. I'm telling you right now, I don't know enough to be in that situation. I do not envy Kyle Ardoin at all to be in that situation, or anyone else that's going to have to take on that responsibility, because who's to say that the night of the election we're going to get some results and then we're going to have a bunch of mail-in ballots that the result may swing the other way after 2-3 days.
They're already predicting it's going to take probably until the end of December before we actually
Really? I had not heard that length of time.
And that makes me just like nervous, because I'm like, wait a minute, this, it's so much stuff.
If we got people angry doing stuff in cities, destructive stuff in cities right now, there are people doing destructive stuff in cities right now. Are they going to be motivated to do something else because of that window of and mistrust of the outcome?
Yeah.
Are people going to think the fix is in? Are people going to say, "Oh, this is getting removed"? Are people going to argue, and how heated is that going to get after people have been, shut up away from each other and away from activities? Think about kids not being in school. Think about people who had the outlet of sports and things like that. I mean, not just watching sports, but going and playing sports.
Exactly.
Not having that ability to do so, and now we get into something like that that's so highly contested with parties that are so tribalized, as you rightfully say. I just pray for peace. I pray for patience, and I pray for accuracy in all of this, because that's the only way that we can get it through. And then doing stuff in such a transparent way that you can get as many people as possible to believe in the system, because it's been as transparent as it could possibly be, to try to keep people from and taking this to another level of, I don't believe it and I'm going to solve things myself, because taking the law into your own hands usually ends up in a bad way.
This is true. I think that's where we're going to leave it. Councilman Watson, I do appreciate you coming, being a part of the very first episode of Table Talk. This was a very interesting conversation. It was enlightening. And I appreciate you not shying away from any of the questions that I've asked. You tackled them head on. So you lived up, to what I read about you, your
Well,
reputation
thank you.
definitely preceded you of someone who gets in there and gets their hands dirty and just does the work.
I appreciate the depth of questions you brought. I really appreciate the give and take that we've had. Thank you very much. And I appreciate you creating a show like this, and I'm sure I'll be seeing you talking to some other people and having some great conversations.
I hope so. And once we get a couple more episodes under our belt, I'm going to have to definitely invite you back.
Wonderful. I'll be here.
All right. Well, I appreciate you all for listening, watching, and we'll be back next time. Thanks.